And you're listening to the Lunchtime programme here on News Talk 106 to 108. The text line for your messages is 53106. First of all, today I want you to listen to a remarkable piece of audio. It's a speech by Brendan Ogle, who's the most senior trade unionist in the ESB. He represents 7,000 highly paid workers at that organisation. He delivered a speech some weeks ago in which he lambasted the Labour Party for its right-wing ideas and its fear of trade unions. He also took time out to observe that his own members were quote-unquote spoilt. Their average pay is about 75 grand a year, and they also have big pension entitlements. And he observed that they had good cars, holiday homes in places like Bulgaria, and lots more besides. But he also took time out to say that Colin McCarthy, and I'm putting it politely here, had made a hames of his report on the privatisation of state assets. A lot of people will agree with Ogle's ideas, but the question is, why did he make such a provocative speech? We'll have reaction in just a few minutes from economist Moore McDougall, who has written a book about the ESB and has been keeping a beady eye on the ESB ever since. But first, let's listen to the man himself, Brendan Ogle.
I, by some combination of factors, have found myself representing the workers in ESB, and they're very privileged and very lucky as well. You wouldn't know it listening to some of them some of the time, but they are very privileged and very lucky. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm just a trade union official, and I'm very lucky because I've got a job. It's a good job. Good job because it pays relatively well, not the sort of figures you read in the paper, but I'm okay. And I like it. I'm lucky. People I represent are lucky. And the people I represent have power. But I've got a problem with the people that I represent who have power. Because they also have money. They're also, and they won't mind me saying this because I say it to them often enough, they're also spoiled. Because for the last 20-25 years, when they were building this and building that and building the other, the thing that the right wing, Fianna Fáil, PD governments needed, once they got the unions in their back pocket, the thing they needed the most was industrial peace. And the way they got that is to throw a bit of gravy around the place. A bit of overtime here. This thing in ESB called after hour schemes, it'll take me an hour to explain it to you. Gravy. So people who work at good jobs, were always good jobs, suddenly are in great jobs. Not only have they got the house, the mortgage is paid off, they're buying an apartment in Bulgaria, and they've got 2 or 3 cars.
Moore McDougall, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon to you, then.
What do you make of these comments from Brendan Ogle about the ESB workers being spoilt and getting used to gravy being poured down on them from on high? Extraordinary.
It was an extraordinary speech. The politics of it escaped me entirely. Clearly, he has a view that the unions in the ESB were in a position, if you like, to force change politically, but they were too happy because they were so well paid that they didn't do it. His philosophy of what unions are about and their role in society mightn't be one which is shared by most trade union members, who see the job of trade unions to look after the material standards of living of the members. However, he's on strong ground in terms of the level of pay to a point. I mean, he used the figure which has been cited of 75,000. You mentioned it yourself. Actually, it's a bit higher. It's over 90 when you include pension and other costs. But remember that if you're looking at the ESB, a profile of ESB workers from management down to shop floor would not be representative of the country as a whole. They'd have a big number of engineers, highly skilled blue-collar workers who would normally be paid more than the industrial average. The second point about this is that in the context of rising prices for electricity, I know that a few years ago, Brendan Ogle also said that the only basis for increasing prices in electricity should be increased energy costs, fuel costs, and he was calling at that time for the market forces to determine electricity prices. It was back in 2007, and go a long way with them there. But if you check out the actual percentage of the ESB's overall costs each year, which are accounted for by their labour costs, and it comes to around 20%.
20.
So, if you were to cut ESB wages in half, all that would do is reduce costs by around total cost by 10%.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not sure that he was saying that these are remarks in the context of the recent price hike, which is about, I think, 12%. But Moore McDougall, there is a central point in which a lot of people who don't necessarily agree with Brendan Ogle's politics will agree with him, that over the last 10 years, when Fianna Fáil felt under pressure, they basically just doled out gravy, as he put it.
I think that is probably true. It is true, particularly in the public sector. And, the reality is that the Fianna Fáil in the last 20 years, 25 years, has basically been the Labour Party without the title, because they've been completely in bed with the trade union movement. It's perfectly obvious that both the members of the government and the top brass of the trade unions were very comfortable together. So, yes, I think he's right, but I'm not sure what it is he would have preferred, unless he doesn't like industrial peace, he likes strife, I don't know.
Well, perhaps he's suggesting that his members are too well paid to take on the government politically. Is that a fair interpretation of what he's saying?
I think you're right. Yes, that is what he's saying. He'd prefer them meaner, hungrier and angrier. But if I were a member of a trade union, I wouldn't say the job of the trade union is to make sure that I'm poor enough to be angry enough.
Yeah, what about these observations about the Labour Party? He said they are so right-wing that most right-wing Labour trade union movement in Europe is too left-wing for them. In other words, they're terrified of a trade union movement which is itself, by international standards, very right-wing. So I
don't think the Labour Party is terrified. The Labour Party is left of centre, but it's not very far left of centre. But it's also true that the trade unions at the top don't tend to be very far left. That's life. That's Ireland. So what's the point?
Is this kind of some kind of utopian socialist thinking? Because he says the trade unions in Ireland are more right-wing than the right-wing unions in the United States. And, it's basically saying that the Labour Party are out of order, the unions are out of order.
Sorry, David, what's the point here? That Ireland should have more angry left-wingers in the trade union movement and in politics. It hasn't.
That's what that's my reading of it, but...
I think, he's basically talking about a view of politics in which he thinks the unions are no use to him insofar as his political ideology is concerned.
Do you think that the assertion about the Labour Party is right, that it's terrified of the trade union movement?
No, I don't. I think that a lot of people would suggest that the Labour Party is too close to the trade unions. I don't believe that.
Yeah, we should say also that we tried to get some of the unions to come on to give their view about what Brendan Ogle had to say and whether they were right-wing or left-wing or centre or whatever, but they weren't willing to come out and talk about this.
You greatly surprised me.
Well, yeah, absolutely. There is a central truth in a lot of what he said. He went on further then, and he said that the report on this privatisation of state assets was that Colin McCarthy had made a hames of it. Now, he didn't quite use those words. He used a much more vulgar expression.
Words that began with a B and ended with an X, I think.
Yeah, but what's your view on that? Colin McCarthy is
no idea. Colin McCarthy is unquestionably one of the best economists in the country today, and one of the shrewdest and least likely to make mistakes in his arithmetic of all the people who are involved. And I know Colin well, worked with him. I really can't. I would just call that sort of an incident, vulgar abuse.
Overall, and the ESB for going back years, it's unlikely that the people who actually work in the ESB will appreciate these comments.
I would say it's extremely unlikely. But if I could go back to what I said earlier about what Brendan Ogle said back in 2007, he's talking about market forces determining prices in the energy market, with which I agree. But he's also saying that the unions are in a position to stop the government reforming the structure of the ESB to make the provision of electricity in the country more competitive. If you want market forces, you don't want a state monopoly involved.